over the last 5 years, saving them for what he imagined would become his memoirs, assuming anyone cared. If he even made it out alive, wasn't that what he'd been thinking? And had he really left without taking all those notes with him? The thought hadn't occurred to him until now. He had to get hold of those notes. He hadn't planned that far ahead when he'd simply walked out on his wife and child and vanished out of their lives 10 days ago, on the 17th of May, too, the first Independence Day celebrated in freedom since 1939. He'd hidden the notes in a shoebox and put the box in an old American trunk full of discarded clothes in the attic of what had once been his home. And that was where all that stuff would remain if he never returned home. Holt gave a start at the sudden sound of a jeep rounding the corner at terrific speed. It ground to a halt right in front of the stairs where he was standing. The young American driver leaned his head back, lost in his own world as he chewed his gum. When Kai Holt had almost finished his cigarette, the door next to him opened. 2 men stepped out and stopped short. They obviously hadn't noticed the sudden change in the weather. One was American, a captain like Holt himself, and the other was in civvies. The civilian bumped into Holt as they passed and muttered, "Sorry," in Swedish. The American captain gave Holt a brusque nod before they went down the steps. The captain said, "Get back in," when the driver jumped out to open the door on the passenger side. The civilian, who had a remarkably childish face, turned to give Holt a long look before he got in the car. A smile seemed to tug at his lips beneath the wet brim of his hat. Holt watched the car as it vanished among the trees. He had a feeling he'd seen that childish face somewhere before. No, he thought, he must be imagining things. Usually he would have reacted to the fact that a Swedish civilian was here with an American officer, but today he thought no more about it. The liberation of Norway had created such chaos that almost nothing surprised him anymore. He dropped the cigarette on the ground and turned around. The German imperial eagle above the wheel with the swastika inside was still imprinted on the wired glass of the entry door. The sight gave him a momentary jolt, and he stopped with his hand on the door handle. The hair of the British lieutenant seated behind the improvised counter was thick, black, and shiny. He looked as if he'd sat behind a desk for the duration of the war, and now had emerged to take over the country from the Germans. Beside him stood an armed British MP with a supercilious look on his face. The Englishmen had been here less than a month, but they acted like they owned the country, as did the Americans. He didn't especially like the Yanks, but it was the English for whom he'd developed an odd distaste. They didn't feel a need to proclaim to all the world that they were the victors. They just assumed everybody knew it. If anyone had told this to Kai Holt just a few weeks ago, that he'd end up wishing the damned Brits would go home, well, he would have thought they were out of their minds. As crazy as a person got from lying mutely under the floorboards of a little girl's room in an apartment on Valkyrigata in Oslo, while listening to the Gestapo breathing across the room. Holt pulled the interrogation orders out of his jacket pocket. A corner of the paper had gotten wet and ripped a bit. The British officer took the paper but kept his eyes fixed on Holt, as if he was some kind of idiot. Then he sighed in resignation and smoothed out the sheet of paper. Holt chewed on the insides of his cheeks, suppressing a stupid remark about the English. The lieutenant signed his initials and handed the orders back to him. A British MP corporal strode ahead of him down the basement stairs. A musty smell hovered over the dark basement corridor, causing Holt to gasp for air. A young Milorg soldier was standing guard outside the room where Peter Waldhorst was being held. The young man snapped to attention, but Holt waved his hand dismissively, then grunted a few words to the corporal and watched him retreat the same way he had come. Holt turned around. The stairway at that end of the basement had been blocked off with wide, rough planks. He ran his hand through his hair and tried to ignore the fact that he was underground, confined in a dark, damp basement with only one way out, but the slight trembling of his hand gave him away. He brushed past the Milorg youth and reached for the door handle.